I was wrong on ServiceNow stock. Initially, I had thought about buying into it. However, I hesitated and 2 weeks have passed gone and now the company is up by 40%. Now, before I go further on to explain what I was wrong on ServiceNow and what my initial concerns were, I wanted to first share with you guys what does ServiceNow do. For myself, I use ServiceNow pretty frequently. It's something that I do in my banking job, and one of the easiest way I can explain this to you is that most corporations have so many systems within itself. Sometimes they have 10, sometimes 20, sometimes even 30 different systems. And what ServiceNow allows us to do is for them to communicate within each other. Now, where this comes the biggest benefit is when it comes to IT. That is really their bread and butter. Because before ServiceNow, if I wanted to go ahead and make an IT ticket, I would call for 15 minutes. Somebody would go ahead and make an IT ticket, but we wouldn't know who is resolving the IT ticket. We don't know where the lag is being held up on. But with ServiceNow, it allows all those different systems within a company to communicate within each other. And now I know exactly who is working on the ticket, what's happening, and what needs, if there's any additional information needed from me. Now, the cool thing about all of this is that instead of 15 minutes like it took me before, ServiceNow allows me to do this in about 2 minutes. It's very fast to go ahead and make those IT tickets now because that is their bread and butter service. Now, what I was wrong on this particular business model was that on the last earnings that was announced on April 22nd, ServiceNow, they had a pretty solid beat on their earnings, but they had mentioned about because something in the Middle East, their earnings was not as great as they expected it to be. And this was a red flag for me. I was a little bit concerned, mainly because I can't remember any other tech companies during the same earnings season where they were talking about issues from the Middle East. To me, I felt like it was only ServiceNow that was getting impacted by the Middle East issue. And anytime something is impacting one specific company, that for me was a red flag, specifically when this was a software company. If this was a shipping company, I get it, right? It gets impacted by the Middle East, but a software company, that was something that I was very, very curious on. Now, what changed my viewpoint on this is that I believe that the SaaS apocalypse issue, that the fear of SaaS companies getting destroyed, is overrated. Because in the recent days, we had Snowflake reporting earnings, Datadog reporting earnings, and these earnings are pretty darn impressive. The most recent earning from a SaaS company that really surprised me was Workday, because with all the different layoffs that was happening, I was expecting Workday earnings to be plummeting. But it didn't happen. Their earnings actually was greater than expected, and they're increasing their revenue by double digits. This was an eye opener for me, right? Because this whole time we were talking about SaaS apocalypse, the end of sales as a service type of business model. Yet a lot of these software companies were going higher. Now, granted, there are certain software companies out there that is struggling right now, right? You have Intuit that's struggling right now. You have Zoom that's struggling right now, Adobe, but it's not every single software company like it was before. Because just a few months ago, it felt like if your name was a software company, boom, you got destroyed. Now, this we're picking and choosing winners. Now, what ended up changing my mind on ServiceNow and why I was wrong on ServiceNow was that, man, once a client gets signed into ServiceNow, the switching cost is very high because they have a 98% retention rate. And initially I was like, is it because everybody that gets on ServiceNow, do they love the service? But not exactly. It's because if you were to go ahead and build a business model where all those different systems talk to each other and now you get rid of ServiceNow, I don't know what type of replacement you're going to have. Because to go ahead and provide that infrastructure for all those different systems to talk to each other, it's very incredibly difficult and incredibly costly. And because of that switching cost being so expensive, that is one bullish sentiment going towards ServiceNow's way, where once they sign a client, cool, they have a client that they almost have for a long period of time because of that retention that they have and also the switching cost. The second thing was even if AI could provide this type of infrastructure, I just think it's so freaking difficult because you're dealing with so many different systems at one time. And to build this infrastructure out, you cannot be having any hallucination, because one hallucination in this whole system and it gets destroyed. I don't know any other company out there that does something similar to what ServiceNow does. When I take a look at the AI impacting ServiceNow, I actually think AI is going to be helping ServiceNow in its business model rather than competing against it and harming ServiceNow. And when I take a look at the recent win that's been happening on end of May for ServiceNow, right? I take a look at, okay, the first thing is all these software companies, well, not all of them, but many of them are beating their earnings. Datadog, you have Snowflake, amazing earning, Workday, amazing earnings there, and even ServiceNow had a pretty decent earnings. The second catalyst was when Bank of America analysts upgraded the company. They thought, from the point of the Bank of America analysts, they are expecting ServiceNow to keep having more growth to be had. And as I started thinking about it, the company that people compare ServiceNow the most closest to is Salesforce, because these are two type of enterprise software that it's really, really hard to get it out of your workflow. Because if you were to get Salesforce out of your workflow, the switching cost is just so much. Same with ServiceNow. But the one advantage that ServiceNow has on top of Salesforce is that ServiceNow, they're not that big. There is still a lot of people, a lot of companies for ServiceNow to sign up as clients. And that is a big, big bullish sentiment for ServiceNow compared to a huge conglomerate like Salesforce, where they're already so big and they're still getting more customers. It's harder for them to find new customers. Whereas with ServiceNow, because they're not that big yet, they're still finding a lot more clients. What's crazy about ServiceNow and how small they are is that when you talk to most people do not know what ServiceNow does. Even if they work at big corporations, they don't really realize what ServiceNow does because they don't maybe interact with all the different systems, but it works on the back end. And all of this, when you take into it holistically, it's leading up to why ServiceNow has been going up so high, up to even 40% in the last 2 weeks. So that was my error in my ways. I paid way too much attention to the Middle East issue and why was ServiceNow bringing up the issues of the Middle East into their earnings when I should have really taken a look at the switching costs and how AI is actually going to be helping ServiceNow rather than harming it. Because the company has now gone up more than 40%, I have missed out on it. I will not be adding to ServiceNow now that it's gone up so high. But if there is actually a pullback on this company, I actually can see myself buying into it. This is not any financial advice by any means, so please don't tag me at all. However, this is just my thought process on what I thought about the company of ServiceNow, a tool that I utilize on a weekly basis.